Hello, I'm author Bob Pierce, and welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to start a series on the bits and pieces of putting your book together. First, though, I just wanted to show you a couple of our alumni. As we mentioned in one of the very first videos, that this whole series is growth out of a series of live seminars that I did with another independent author. And a couple of our alumni, if you will, people who attended these events, have successfully finished and published their own books. One of which is C.G. Quillitz III, who published this one, Higher Education, and Marcy Heath Robotel. And I hope if Marcy sees this video that I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And she wrote this very deep personal book, and they each attended our seminars at various times and used the tools that they got from us to finish writing and put together these books, and were kind enough to send us samples with a thank you note in each case, and it's thrilling to see that. And so hopefully these videos will help you to be just as successful as Marcy and CG have been. So you're ready to put this together. You've finished your manuscript. You've gone through draft after draft after draft. You've gotten all your illustrations together, and you've got a plan, some sort of an idea how you want it to look when it's all said and done. And now it's time to put the pieces together. So whether you do this yourself, or you hire it out, or you have the publishing company do it, this video and the ones to follow will give you the tools to make certain necessary decisions as to how it's going to be laid out, what it's going to look like, and so forth. And basically I'm going to show you just how I tend to do it. Now, I've done a dozen books so far. No two of them are exactly alike, so I'm going to show you a little bit about the different ways that I do different things. Every book that you do is going to have certain elements. It's just the way a book goes together. Of course, there's the front cover. There is the front of book section. There are the chapters themselves, the part that you've labored so long and hard on. Then the back of book section, and finally the back cover. Now we'll talk about the outside covers later on in another video. In this one we're going to talk about everything in between the covers, the so-called text pages, as the publishing company will refer to them. And we'll pass along a few technical terms, some printer's terms that you may not be aware of, things that didn't survive the transition from the ink and printing press era to the computer and digital press era, but are still used in the printing industry, so you need to be aware of those. So we'll touch on those as we go along as well. The terms front of book and back of book mean pretty much what they sound like. Front of book is everything that appears between the front cover and the beginning of the chapters, the meat of the book, if you will. And then back of book is everything that appears after the last page of your chapters through to the back cover. And the front of book, well, I'm going to basically show you what I typically do, and I've gotten the ideas from looking at other books. To be fair, they're not all original ideas. I look at other books, as I would expect you would as well, and see what works best, what you think looks best, and, well, just take it from there. Use that as your example. I like the books of Joel C. Rosenberg. The first time I saw this, and I'm sure it's not exclusive to him, but he does what is essentially a spread for his title page. Now, a spread is a term for 2 pages. These two, this would be half of it, this would be the other half, left page, right page, that's a spread. And that's kind of a neat sort of thing to do. His are usually dark and have pictures of the White House and stuff like that. They're mostly political dramas. But I like to use it for pretty much any of my books. This is from Lilith, obviously, and this is part of the photo shoot that we did for the front cover, and we'll talk about that when we talk about live models in a later video. But one of the things that I always do when I have a photographer work is kind of give him free rein to do what he thinks is artistically interesting. Sometimes you get some pretty useful images that you can use elsewhere in the book, and this is one of them. So the issue that this causes, however, is that when you first open the book, that first right-hand page is blank. So what I do is I start out with a page one, well, kind of just sort of a line. Sometimes it's a quote from somebody. Sometimes it's lifted from somewhere in the text of that particular book that kind of leads into the storyline. Then the title spread right after that. Afterwards, then, is the copyright page. That's a necessary thing that you've got to have in. That's mandatory. Whether you opt to do your title page this way or not, you have to have that copyright page, and it has to be right up front. And we'll talk about the specifics of that in just a moment. After that, the title page, the single title page, which leaves room for an autograph. Now, you could conceivably autograph this if you wanted to. Or I usually put the title page in right after the copyright page, as the copyright on the left, the title page on the right, and I can just go right to it to do my autographs whenever I do a live event. After that, you want to include your dedications. Now, dedications aren't the same as the thank yous and the acknowledgments that will appear in the back of the book. This will be one or two people, entities, organizations, whatever it is you want to dedicate this particular piece of work to. And then after that, your table of contents. Now, if you're writing fiction, you're not always going to include a table of contents. It's not really necessary. I do because I title my chapters, and it's kind of fun to have a list of the various titles for all the chapters in one place. And sometimes I can use that to preview the book before it gets released by posting it on my website and on Facebook. So this is what's coming. Usually the titles don't tell you very much at all, but they could be interesting and a little enticing. And then after that, I've done this on a few occasions, and again, I got this idea from Rosenberg, a list of your characters and all the pertinent main characters anyway, and just a short one line about each one of them, so people have a pretty good idea of who they are and what their role is in the story. And lastly, if you care to, your author's comments. Now, this is not the same as the introduction or a prelude or something like that that might be part of the story itself. This is your own personal comments, and you should signify that at the end with your name, and just so that people know that you're making your opinion, your view, your encouragement, or whatever it is you want to voice personally to your readers in that one little section on that page. Your copyright page. Now, this is something that is mandatory in every published work. You have to have this page in there, and it has to include certain elements. And basically, I'll go down the list here, and hopefully it's I'm sure you can't read it in the video, but you can get an idea what's going on here. This first section up here is your declaration that this is a work of fiction, that any resemblance to real people, living or dead, is strictly coincidental, even if it's not. And that sort of thing. The next little line here is your copyright declaration. Either the word copyright or the copyright symbol, the C with the circle around it. I usually put in both because I don't know how it's going to translate into certain languages. Some of my books get translated into languages that are not necessarily using Roman characters. So copyright, the year that you're going to release it, So if you're hammering this thing out throughout one particular year, but it's not going to hit the stores or hit Amazon or wherever until the following year, that's the year that needs to be on it, the year that it's going to be released, and by whom. Now, since these are self-published books, that whom is you. So you put your own name on there. And that way, too, you are claiming ownership, like staking a flag on top of a hilltop, and theoretically nobody can steal your work without, well, can't use it without your permission. Now, you're going to state that later on. In this next section, all rights are reserved. And basically what that says is that nobody can reproduce any of it. Nobody can pull a quote out of it. Nobody can use the images that are in it or anything else without written permission from you. And that's why it's important down further to include your contact information. Now, you don't have to put your name and address and all of that stuff on it. I mean, if you write something pretty controversial, you don't want people banging on your front door. Generally, well, what I did, and it was just more of a matter of convenience than any fear of the villagers with pitchforks and torches coming up my driveway. No, just to be able to keep my own personal emails and correspondence separate from anything having to do with the books, I set up a Gmail account. Just for the books, and that's what appears here, and you'll see it at the end of this video as well. Anything relating to Bob's Awesome Books is goes through that particular website. And below here too, you need to say where it's printed. I'm sure when you go to Walmart and you pick up any number of different products, you see on it made in China. Actually, if you go to Walmart, most everything there is made in China. But that's a declaration that has to appear also in your book. Now, it's not where you wrote it. It's where it's printed, where the ink hits the paper before it actually goes out the door to the public. Now, you may have to do a little bit of digging to find that out. I use Amazon's Kindle service, previously the CreateSpace service. They use digital printing companies in the US, so I can put on here printed in the United States. Lastly, in this little section is your ISBN number. Your book should have one. It's required by certain publishers. For example, Kindle and Amazon require an ISBN number. Now, there's a couple of ways to go about getting one. You can get your own. Go online, go to the ISBN service that registers all these numbers and buy one. It'll cost you a few $100s for one. You can buy 10 of them for not a whole lot more. And you get the idea. The more you buy, the cheaper they are. But if you're going to buy 1,000 ISBN numbers, what are you going to do with 999 numbers and you've spent all that money on them? The really nice thing about a lot of these publishing companies, and Kindle does this as well, they offer a free ISBN number and the barcodes, the USB code that goes on the back cover at no charge. So the best thing to do is take advantage of that. I do all the time. And now that identifies this issue, this edition of this particular book. If you do an updated version of the book and you reissue it at about a second issue or a second edition, it needs its own ISBN number. So you want to bear that in mind. This number is for this book in this configuration, in this release. Now you can, with these on-demand printing services, you can be printing copies of this book until the cows come home. Still, it's the same barcode, the same ISBN number to identify this book. And finally, this little section down here in this particular book, there are a lot of them to include. Usually there's only a couple. Your photo credits. I usually make them a little smaller than the rest of the text there. And we'll be talking more about photos, illustrations, that sort of thing in the future, but this is where you want to include them on your copyright page. In my books, because of the way I configure them with the first page with that quote on it, the spread, this ends up being page 4. Opposite it would be the table of contents, and that's the way I usually set up, well, the very first several pages of the front of book for pretty much all of my books. Now, the back of book section, that's going to include, well, that's about as free and optional as any part of your book could ever be. One of the things that I always like to include, and somebody told me this early on in my book writing career here, people like to connect with the author. I like to know a little bit about the guy or gal, whoever the author might be. So an about the author page is something that I include in all of my books with a photograph that, well, it's not a professional portrait, but it was shot by a professional photographer just as a whim, and I thought it was pretty cool. I like the hat, and I like the background, and the Hawaiian shirt, of course, is, well, that's always a good thing. In color, it comes off rather nicely. Black and white, though, looks good too, and I'm smiling in it, which I don't smile a lot in photographs for some reason. I don't know why. But anyway, not an in-depth biography, just a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit of background, where you were born, where you grew up, where do you live now. Again, don't be too specific. I just put in here that I was born in southern Connecticut, lived in New England all of my life, presently live in northern Vermont. That's enough. I live here with my wife of several decades, and I have 3 grown sons and 5, so far, granddaughters scattered all over the place. And that's about all that's on there as far as personal information. It says a little bit about how I've been writing books for so many years, and that's really all you need to include. Another page on this part of the book, which would follow this, would be your thank yous and your acknowledgments. Now, this is different from the dedications page. Generally, what I include in here is anybody who has helped me in the process of writing this particular book. For example, in a couple of books, I've interviewed a couple of cops, one for each of a couple of different books. So I included them as a thank you. I talked to an autistic young man for Pieces. I included him in the thank yous. On the books that I did live photo shoots of live models for the covers and so forth, the crew that helped out with that, the photographer, the makeup artist, and the hairdresser that were part of that operation, and anybody else who pitched in to help. In one case, we were in St. Albans, and the local police department came by and gave us... it was kind of fun to talk to them. They were a little concerned that we were posing in public with what appeared to be real guns. But they were really cool about it and really fun, so I included them in the back of the book there and said thank you for your support in this. And the last thing that I include in each book is the other titles that I've written. Now, if you haven't written anything else yet, you really can't do this, but if you have other books out there and you want to, just let people know, basically if they like this book, they're probably going to like one of your other books. So put a thumbnail on the page, a picture of the cover, and a very short description, whatever it is that you have in Amazon or whatever you have online that you're using to promote it with. Keep it short, just a short paragraph, and then announce to people where they can get it. Of course, hopefully they'll follow through and get one, but it's free advertising. You're going through the motions of making this book, and you're going to pay for the fees to put it all together, whatever's involved. Why not invest a page or two, depending on how many books you've got to promote, at the back of the book, and take advantage of that free advertising. Now, in between the front of book and the back of book are going to be your pages of chapters, the story itself that you've written. Now, before you get started, you're going to need to make a few decisions. First of all, what software you're going to use to lay it out. Now, there are some industry standard softwares out there that you'll want to consider. The bottom line is that what you need to provide the printer with is a high-resolution PDF file. Two of them, actually. One for the cover, one for the interior pages. And the programs that are generally used in the industry are well, there's really one these days. It's called InDesign. It's an Adobe product. Back in the day, PageMaker was the industry standard. Then Quark came along, and they kind of went back and forth. Most printers tore their hair out because they got stuff done in either. Then the whole PDF thing came along, and people started saying, well, we don't care what program you use. Just send us a PDF when all is said and done with everything embedded, and we don't have to worry about anything. And so InDesign became the industry standard shortly after that. Adobe bought Aldus, which was the company that made PageMaker, reworked PageMaker to include a lot of the features that people liked in Quark, ended up with kind of this hybrid in the end, called it InDesign, and put Quark out of business. That's how the software industry works, I guess. Now, as far as the interior pages are concerned, a lot of these publishing companies also offer Word templates that you can use to do it yourself. Now, if you don't have access to this software to lay out the pages, this professional stuff, you can use Word. And I know, for example, Kindle does offer these templates, and you can just download the template and lay your book out with it, and then use that to create your PDF file and upload that. So, to begin with, you need to lay out a template for your pages. The first decision you need to make is what size your pages are going to be. Before you start making any templates or anything, you need to decide, how big is my book going to be? Now, most publishing companies offer certain standard sizes, and you do a little bit of research on their sites, you can see what sizes they do have available. There are two standard sizes that you want to use. If you're doing a children's picture book, 8.5 by 11 is pretty much standard, either going vertically or horizontally. But if you're doing a book, novel of some sort, there are a lot of choices, but the trade size, and they call it that because it is really the standard, is 6 by 9. And you'll find some of your overseas publishing companies and some of the American publishing companies that use overseas printing operations to actually physically print the books will have dimensions that are kind of close to that, because they're using millimeters and centimeters as opposed to American inches. But 6 wide, 9 inches tall, that's a standard trade size, and every brick and mortar bookstore in America anyway, is really kind of geared for it. So that I would highly recommend, and you don't have to do it that size, but I would highly recommend you opt for that. So then you need to set up your template within those dimensions. And basically, now I know in InDesign you have a template page where you can go in there, set up your template, and those guide marks and everything else will appear on all the rest of the pages as you go through and set them up. So you need to set up a top margin, an outside margin, and an inside margin, and a bottom margin. Now, you don't have to worry about left and right. If you select the facing page option, which is what really you want to do, because that's how your book is going to look, and as you're working in InDesign, that's how it's going to appear on the screen. Now, when you make your PDF file, it will separate out all the pages. That's something you need to keep in mind as you go laying out the pages, especially when you do spreads. You can't have one image that goes across both pages. You have to split the image so that half of it's on this page, half of it's on that page. It's easy enough to do. But this margin on the inside needs to be a little bit wider than this margin on the outside. And the reason for that is that when this stuff all gets put into the inside of the binding like this, you see how some of it kind of gets stuffed inside there and can't really be seen well. So you want to give a little bit of extra margin on the inside to be able to compensate for that. It's an old printer's trick, and I think Kindle actually requires it, but not all publishers bother to mention it, as a matter of fact. So what I usually do is I'll set up a 1/2 inch, and I'll set up 5/8 of an inch here. So there's an extra 1/8 of an inch in the spine, and then 1/2 inch up top, and at the bottom, this is at 3/4 of an inch for the bottom of the text, which gives me a little bit of room for the folio at the bottom here. Now, in computer speak, we call that a footer, and you'll probably see that out there in the world. Technically, the page number is called a folio in the printing industry. And this footer, which appears on both sides, wants to have the page number, the folio, on the outside of each page. On the inside, on your left-hand page, you're going to have your name, the author's name, and on the right-hand page, on the inside, you're going to have the title of the book. As you flip through the book, you know, this is set up on the template page, so every page will have this on it. As you flip through the book, you'll see this. Now, when you put a full page photograph on here, you're going to cover that up. So you'll need to go back to your template page, copy that, come back here and paste it in place so that it's layered on top of the photograph. Just a little tip I learned when the first time I did it and realized, wait a minute, I can't do that. I can't see my page numbers. So just a little layout trick there. Now, when you set up your style sheets, that's the next thing you need to consider. In InDesign, you can set up you can define what we call style sheets. Style sheet is the font, the type style, the size, and the leading, which is the spacing from line to line. And each of these different sections, the page number, the page title, or the chapter title rather, the chapter number, and the text itself has to have its own style sheet. And they're really easy to set up, and once you do, you're going to find putting this thing together is a breeze, because you're going to drop in a block of text and you're going to select all, which is Command A or whatever it is, Control A on a Mac, and click on that style sheet, and bang, the whole thing is formulated for you. It's all formatted. Then all you got to do is go through and make adjustments. Now, on your layout template, you want to put in some guides, which obviously you can't see on a printout, but these guides, these blue lines, as to where these different elements are going to be, where this title line is going to be, where the first line of your first page of your chapter is going to be, presuming following pages will have them start at the top where right now the chapter number is. It's very time saving to do all of that in advance, and keep this stuff small, readable but small, and keep your text readable. Now, I look through a lot of books. I'm always looking for ideas, and I see a lot of people using the old standard 10-point on 12-point sizing. Now, 10-point is the size of the text, the actual font. The second number is the leading, and the leading, it's an old letterpress term meaning the distance between the baseline, and that's the line that the letters actually sit on, from one to the next. So basically that's 10-point tall type with 2 extra points of lead in between, a little extra spacing. A point is 1/72 of an inch. Not that that matters, but you don't have to do the math. It's just another little printer's, I don't know, term to keep in the back of your brain if you care to. And so I set up 11 point on 15, or 11 and a half on 15 if I can get away with it. Maybe it's because I'm getting older. Maybe it's because my audience is typically a little older. Maybe because my friends complain that the type is too small otherwise. But I like to make, if my book is easy to read, people will read it. If it's hard to read, they'll put it down and say, this is too much like work. It sounds superficial and silly, but I have found that people are lazy, generally speaking. They will not do the work if they don't feel like it. Reading is something people like to do for leisure, and if you make it too difficult for them, they're probably not going to bother doing it. Now, one of the last decisions you're going to have to make is whether or not you're going to start all of your chapters on a right-hand page. It's kind of an old convention, but a lot of people still stick to it. You can find a lot of examples in a used bookstore of either, going back as far as you care to go back, and however much dust you care to blow off of whatever you pick up. But the decision then you need to make is, if you're going to do a right-hand start for all of your chapters, what do you do with the facing page? Are you going to leave it blank? I've seen that done. Or are you going to fill it with something? Now, this is from the Sherlock Holmes book that I did, The Lothian Conspiracy, and you have a parchment colored background with a pattern that's airbrushed around the edges to make it look a little old. A small icon in the center, which is a combination of a magnifying glass depicting Sherlock and a rose depicting Irene Adler, just kind of an icon centered on the page. And that appears on every blank left-hand page. So technically there are no blank pages. In this case, I went and duplicated the folio line and included it on that page as well. Now, on other books, this is from Lilith, I did a little bit different treatment to it. I gathered a bunch of photographs that were somehow related to the storyline. This is a picture from a Bangkok flower market, and no, I guess this one's actually the vegetable market. I have some from the flower market too. There are in other pages to make it look like an FBI surveillance photo. We blanked out the eyes, like you've seen in, well, probably somewhere. I don't think people do that anymore, but that was done in Photoshop. Added the FBI seal up here, added a little barcode over here, and has the FBI, well, supposedly the code number for the photograph on there. All of that sort of thing to kind of make it look a little official. Dropped it in the middle of this gray background and put a shadow behind it to give it a little bit of depth, and did that throughout the book. Now, this particular book, it worked out really well because it had a somewhat larger count of chapters than most of the books that I've written. So I had a lot of left-hand pages that I had to fill, so I was able to help reinforce the story with images like this throughout the whole thing. But again, that's a decision that you're going to have to make at the beginning before you begin laying it out, and probably even before that, because if you decide to go this route, you got to go hunt down a whole bunch of photographs legally. You can't just go plucking them off the internet. You have to buy them. You have to take them yourself if that's possible. You have to accumulate them any legal way you can, and then prep them all to be used for these pages. Pretty time consuming, but as you're going through the process of writing the book, going from draft to draft to draft, there are going to be some breaks. I usually go through the first 2, 3, maybe 4 drafts, and then print the whole thing out on paper and let somebody do some proofreading, or just kind of sit on it for a while. I call it my walkabout period. It may be a few weeks, it may be a couple of months, whatever is appropriate. That's the time that I usually spend designing the cover, accumulating pictures like this, hunting down any of that sort of illustrative stuff, making props, building stuff if I have to, doing photography. We'll talk about all of that in another video about doing props and all of that, and doing the photography and setting all that sort of thing up. I find it to be one of the most fun parts of the whole process, but some people find it to be rather drudgery. I guess it depends on just what kind of a creative mind you have and where it takes you. So those are all the nuts and bolts elements involved in putting together the text portion of your book, the interior part with all of the black and white pages. We're going to talk about the covers in another video coming up, how to go about designing your cover. There's a psychology involved in that, and we're going to cover that as well. Photo props that you'll use inside the book, how to build them, how to find them, how to photograph them, various cover design ideas and options, and how to work with live models like the one that appears on the cover of Lilith here and other books that I've done. We'll talk about that whole dynamic as well. So until then, I'm Bob Pierce from the studio.